okay, you're going to judge me for this, but genuinely, I always thought discussions around isolation in academia would never really affect me because I've spent most of my life, 85% of my adult life, living alone, and I'm being pretty isolated from most people in my life. And yet, just like every other part of the PhD process, I was proven wrong. You see, I thought the feelings of isolation would really only affect those who had more friends and a social life than I ever did, and I presumed as an introvert like me, I wouldn't even notice the difference when I started my PhD. And I'm not going to lie, it didn't get worse per se, but the loneliness changed. You see, I'm not entirely sure if this is a universal or even a common experience of the PhD journey, but I found people became immediately kind of hostile to me when I started. I had quite a negative and aggressively critical reactions from people when I told them I was doing a PhD, which resulted in me ending multiple relationships. It was weird because I felt like my good news had inspired a lot of hateful reactions from other people, from anger to outright malicious jealousy and competitiveness and frustration in people around me. And even online, I was subjected to comments like, oh, that's such a waste of money, or what are you doing it for? You'll never get a job with that. Higher education is pointless. So really, it wasn't the isolation I was expecting. It was like a shunning, in a way. And the isolation thus kind of came in on me the moment I got the offer from my application. I felt like I was alienated. It was like I got officially severed from huge parts of my original core social group, and they closed their doors on me. Or I had to walk away because I wasn't dealing with that. And in my opinion, someone doing a PhD shouldn't be a huge deal to anyone else if you're not, anyone else is depending on you in any way. Most people shouldn't care what other people are doing, but I found a lot of people in my life really cared and were not supportive or enthusiastic in the way that I'd hoped. Conversations all revolved around how I would spend time on their needs and their wants and what this meant for my future career and what this meant for my income, even if it didn't affect them. I was called selfish for making a decision at the expense of my clients' ambitions for me, and I was even criticised for choosing a degree path that others hadn't chosen for me. They wanted me to do a complete different topic entirely. It was such a thick negative swamp that I had to get through, even before I started the PhD. So then when I started the PhD, I felt really alone. Like I felt alone beforehand. And because I do distance learning and I'm part-time, I have no physical connection with the university or anyone at the university. I don't know people there. Unless I'm willing to spend hundreds of pounds to travel down there and stay there a couple of nights, which I'm not. I just don't have that disposable income. You see, back in the good old days of Twitter, BME, I was able to connect with a lot of PhD students from around the country, but due to commitments and time zones, it's somewhat really impossible to connect on a long-term basis with people. And that's the same reality I have with those in my real life who do PhDs. You see, PhDs eat away at our mental health and keep many people in obsessive workaholic states of being, making it almost impossible to build any sort of community. And unless you work in a lab or with a team of other scientists, academia is somewhat designed to be mostly a solo act, and thus is isolating. And even for scientists, the writing part is solitary, and for all of us, conferences serve as a momentary snippet of camaraderie, and even conversation with another academic. And even then, unless you were lucky enough to get funding, you probably had to pay well in excess of £500 just for the privilege of having brief conversations with other academics, which is how much my last conference cost me, which is why I haven't gone to one in nearly 2 years. And also, most of the conversations you have about your PhD outside of fellows in your field of academia consist of one sentence. So, how's the PhD coming along? Have you gotten any further with it yet? Which obviously makes you immediately want to crawl up into a ball and die, because the sensation of having everything you're working towards being condensed into a singular checkbox on a hard-to-do list that you've never even written and is running against a rapidly ticking clock makes you want to scream obscenities in their face. But instead you just say, okay, thanks, and let the conversation die there. And obviously, because you just say, okay, thanks, you're just translated to everyone in the outside world as a glorified student who isn't working hard at anything meaningful or significant. But you know that if you extrapolated on anything more to these people, you'd either bore them to death or sound like a weirdo and consider too much or too intense for casual conversation. In fact, any sort of accomplishment that I can attain on my day-to-day academic life would seem absurd to the vast majority of people. And the guilt I feel in doing anything other than work or study makes me so unwell that I become physically physically unable to do either of those things. But one of the little things we can do for ourselves when we are isolated is actually take up a wee bit of a hobby. And what's a better way to take up a hobby than with today's wholesome sponsor, which is the wonderful, lovely Craftsy. Craftsy, if you're unfamiliar, is an online community and resource where millions of crafters, makers and DIY enthusiasts can learn new or improve existing creative skills. So whether you're interested in learning how to draw or sew or do yoga, cook, bake or even woodwork, Craftsy has over 2,000 exciting classes led by talented and friendly experts who will inspire you with their wisdom and passion. Now, something I realised recently whilst moving was that I have a lot of cameras. I have a lot, okay? I never really truly learned how to use them. I only ever used them for vlogging. But photography is actually really interesting to me. So I had a browse through their photography classes, and the one by Chris Gray is incredibly informative. I really enjoyed his style, especially when it came to the settings and composition part. I thought he explained it really wonderfully for me. And it's not just video classes on there. Members have access to Craftsy's live streaming tutorials where expert instructors will share their tips and answer questions directly to the audience in real time. So if you want to find the joy of making something and getting off the screen for a wee while and just engaging your brain in a different way, then I have an awesome deal for you. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the description box down below will get a full year of premium membership for Craftsy for just $1.49, which is insane. It's valid to only new members, but I hope you have access to it immediately. Check the link down below. I hope you enjoy it. And thank you, Craftsy, for sponsoring today's video. I think what I've learned from not talking to other people, but from reading blogs, because that's how I connect with other people, is via the internet and not even directly, is that feeling lonely is the norm in academia rather than the exception amongst postgraduate researchers. Following the Postgraduate Research Experience Survey in 2023, 2 areas which were rated with lowest satisfactions were feeling of a sense of belonging at 62% and feeling part of a community in PGRs, which was 57%. Now, what's weird about these numbers is that I often worry about the normalisation and even romanticisation of isolation, of disappearing into one's mind. For while solitude can be healing, I feel like many of us feel pressured to embrace and romanticise the isolation at the expense of thinking critically about how loneliness is negatively impacting our research and our mental health, or rather be critical of the fact that institutions aren't making it one of their top priorities to discourage. Students falling ill, dropping out and just never finishing their studies is excessively high in doctoral programmes. This 2024 paper cites that in Australian, British, Canadian and American institutions, the average dropout rate is between 30 to 50% depending on the discipline, with supervisor support, or lack thereof, time pressures and passion for the research being the main reasons PhD students drop out. Researchers like Chiang have argued that the quality of supervisor support is more important for successful completion of PhD students in humanities and social sciences, who are more prone to isolation and feeling unsupported. As such, for most failed or struggling PhD students out there, isolation can likely be the byproduct of institutional failing rather than the fact they can't cut it or they weren't intelligent or hard-working enough. Am I taking the accountability off PhD students? No. We, more often than not, play a huge role in our own downfalls, which is something that I will reflect on at the end of this video, when I talk about the mistakes that we make as PhD students and what we can do to fix it. But first, let's look at the environment that we're in. For example, if possibly 30 to 50% of PhD students drop out for reasons such as lack of support and time pressures, why don't institutions focus on supporting doctoral supervisors better and give them the tools that they need to encourage their students with other resources available at the institution that they can signpost doctoral students to in areas where they can't help, because obviously supervisors aren't superhuman, they have needs too. And what's worse is generic wellness programs sadly can't cater to everyone, and thus asking for a single wellness team, usually of 2 people, to be skilled enough to help every kind of student out there in all different possibilities of life is a lot to ask of such a small team. It's a bit of a shame that such huge institutions don't take more of a human approach to check in more on their students and actively discourage students from isolating. I think one of the biggest changes universities could make in their dropout rate is by enforcing socialising criteria. An easy way to do that would be to set a quarterly quota of online or offline socialising, such as shut up and work sessions, or even coffees and chat sessions, maybe once a month. Because whilst it may seem like a chore and an unnecessary to do for students, the research has proven time and time again that these socialising opportunities are essential for the benefit of research, mental well-being, and the institution. Really, I believe isolation in academia should be as discouraged as smoking cigarettes, or only eating ultra-processed foods, or obsessively drinking alcohol. Because if we're quite honest, the research has demonstrated that the romanticised guise of the lonely but productive academic is harming students and research quality and output. But I suppose that's because in many ways, academia rewards silence over solidarity. The environment is hardly built for collaboration. Academic structures are competitive, we all know that, with a dominant publish or perish pressure culture and minimal funding opportunities, with departments closing down all over the world, especially in the humanities. Really, it's much rarer nowadays that PhD students are driven into corners of insanity over obsessive passion for the subject, and more out of fear of imposter syndrome, failure, obsessive perfectionism, and workaholism, all of which are the cost that comes with tying our self-worth to our academic outputs. And you know, we've all been there, we've all been the bit of the unravelling student. I remember very distinctively in the final semester being locked in a toilet cubicle at 3 a.m. crying because I was struggling with Ulysses and I couldn't afford to buy toilet paper, and somehow I managed to make those two very distinct problems collide into one cataclysmic one before walking home at 4 a.m. and then going to work like nothing happened. Being alone with a very complex problem makes us go a little bit mad at times, and that distorted understanding of the world is made worse through isolation. But out of shame and embarrassment, many of us don't ask. We don't ask for help, we don't ask for support, and we don't ask for company. I've been very open about the fact that my shame and embarrassment at how hard I was finding academia made me bottle up from talking to my supervisors and asking questions, when I know now that they would have been perfectly happy to address them. In fact, I knew then they would have been perfectly happy to address them, but I was so scared of being seen as that annoying student who didn't know anything and was emailing them all the time, that I then became the absent and seemingly disengaged student, which was far less appealing, and I'm ashamed that I became that way because I didn't want to be that student either. As such, I'm going to force myself to attend and organise more shut up and work sessions, including streaming on here on YouTube, so look out for those. I have a second channel where I stream, so that's all linked in the description box down below. It's like an academic channel, you'll see it down below in the description box. And I'll have a more regular schedule, so Patreons will get notified of when I'm going live for those, and I'll just ping it in the emails of days that I'm going live the week. I also wish I could kind of build a community of peers in academia, ideally through some sort of programme or regular meetups. Again, that's quite hard to do with the university, particularly for distance students, but maybe one day I can think of some kind of collaborative process. I obviously have started trying to do that with writers online. Maybe academics would like to reach out as well, and we could do something together. Please let me know. But I want people to remember that if you feel alone in this, you're evidently not. You will see from this video and in the comment section down below a lot of people in academia probably sharing their stories too. So make sure you do leave your comment down there, and maybe we can try and make some sort of network for people doing their higher education some way, because it's incredibly lonely and it's sad that many of us are alone. Distance learners and alone and feeling quite disconnected from academia itself, and thus it may feel that we're failing at what we want to do, but hopefully we can do this together. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing or liking or leaving a comment. It always helps so much. Thank you as always to my patrons for making this possible, everything possible. I really appreciate all of you, particularly my librarians, Janice, who's getting in a bowl, Eric Taylor, Jenny Edivane, Marina, Psycho Teddy, Josh, Fritz Anderson, Wee Lauren, Nicholas Reed, and Andrea Bazil. Thank you so much for being my top tier patrons. I truly appreciate all of you. And I will see you soon for another video. I hope you're happy and healthy. And remember, books save lives. So keep reading.